Round of applause for Trevor and Peter.
And just remember, a session is never late. A session arrives precisely when it means to.
This afternoon, we're going to take through adaptations of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Now, if we were to talk about every adaptation that was ever made, we'd be here 24 hours. Because there's been hundreds of adaptations in one form or another. So I'm going to start off, and this whole presentation will have some music in it, excerpts from different music. It'll have a little bit of video here. Hopefully I'll be able to signal the guys down the back to stop something so I can talk about it. And so leading off is a couple of online games. Well, one online game that won awards about 10 years ago. It's called War in the North. But there was another one at the same time called Shadow of Mordor. They were quite high quality, and they were both produced by Warner Brothers. Anyway, I'll let you enjoy. I hope you like loud music, because there's some loud music in here. There's even a bit of heavy metal later on. So I'll just let you enjoy the first couple of minutes. I'll go and talk to the boys down the back. Thank you.
At the dawn of the Third Age, the Dark Lord Sauron claimed the allegiance of his cruelest ally, twisted descendant of the Black Númenóreans, Argandar. Now, this corrupted sorcerer plots an attack to strike down Rivendell and join the forces of Sauron in their assault on Rohan and Gondor. Ranger of the North, Lawmaster of Rivendell, Champion of Erebor. Together, you must go behind enemy lines and uncover his dark plans before all of Middle-earth is lost.
Yeah, there's been many adaptations of Middle Earth, and we'll just move on. Even the maps, there's been adaptations of the maps to fit in with different games and movies and so on. Yeah, we'll move to the next picture, thank you. So this is just another adaptation of the previous map. So the previous map is that part there. And then somebody's used imagination to create an entire continent. The first books were published, or The Lord of the Rings were published in 1954 and 1955 in 3 parts. They were never intended to be a story in 3 parts. As a matter of fact, there are 6, within those 3 books there's actually 6 books, 7 if you count the appendices. 1954, 1955. First editions of the Lord of the Rings books can be worth thousands of dollars. And if you're fortunate enough to find a set signed by J.R.R. Tolkien, there was one that sold, as a matter of fact, a couple have sold at auction in the last 10 years for over £100,000.
It began as you might expect. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
J.R.R. Tolkien was born in 1892 in South Africa. He passed away in 1973. And the interesting thing about the date of his death is there was 1 ruling ring, there were 9 rings for men, there were 7 rings for the dwarves and 3 for the elves. Tolkien went on to become, he was an orphan from the age of 12, and he went on to become a professor at Oxford, had 4 children, and the Hobbit book was, should be the next slide, I hope. No, forgot about that one. Yes, he went to war in World War I and actually was involved in the fighting in the Battle of the Somme. He eventually contracted trench fever and was repatriated back home. But it is acknowledged that a lot of his ideas for Mordor came from the blasted fields of France and the trenches and the mud and the blood and whatever else. Next slide. Well, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Let's move on. Right, the Hobbit book was published in 1937. It received accolades. It won a Children's Literature Award, and the review in the Times newspaper, which was, the literacy reviews, the last paragraph of the review of this book said, "Prediction is dangerous, but this could prove to be one day a classic." And that was written way back in 1937. The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are 2 of the all-time most published fiction books. Both of them appear in the top 10. I think this one's about 150 million approximately. The Lord of the Rings is further up the line. Right, in 1955, when the book was first, The Lord of the Rings was first published, the BBC did a radio dramatisation, and then in 1981 they did it again. In the 1981 version, Ian Holm was Frodo. And he went on later on. Can we pause that there, please? Ian Holm went on to be, of course, Bilbo in the Peter Jackson movies. Now, probably the turning point, and when the turning point of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was in 1965. And from that date onwards, we then had a proliferation of other media. And I'll explain that to you why. This edition of The Lord of the Rings was the very first paperback edition, but it was a pirate publication by Ace Paperbacks. They thought there was a loophole in the in the copyright, and they published, I think it was something like 250,000 of these books, and they sold like hotcakes in the United States because they were cheap. And suddenly The Lord of the Rings spread through a larger audience, because up to this date it was only ever published in hardback. And it became almost like a Bible of sorts for the alternate generation, as in flower power, etc., etc. What happened was there was a large copyright dispute which ended up in the papers. That gave the story a lot more publicity. And what happened was, Tolkien was given a big payout. Ace stopped producing the book, and Valentine, the publishers, Tolkien's publishers, then published The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings in paperback. All right, next slide, please, gentlemen. Yeah. Tolkien and his wife are both buried at Northcote Cemetery, north of Oxford. The interesting thing about their gravestone is underneath Edith's name is the word Luthien, and underneath Ronald, or John Ronald, underneath his name is the word Beren. And Luthien and Beren were two lovers in one of Tolkien's earliest stories that you could find in the Silmarillion. There's also been a book published called Beren and Luthien as well. Hopefully one day they'll make a movie about their story, because personally it is my favourite. Next one, please, gentlemen. United Artists. In 1969, Tolkien sold all the dramatic rights to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings to United Artists for £100,000. A lot of people say, well, gee, that's not much. But if you convert that to today's currency, it would be around about $3.5 million today. Now, United Artists eventually sold it out to Sol Zates. Anyway, we'll just, around about the same time, can we just pause that one? Around about the same time, the Beatles became very interested in doing a movie version of The Lord of the Rings. They approached United Artists in 1969, and they also approached Stanley Kubrick. And the Beatles wanted to be have the main starring roles in the movie. Paul McCartney was going to be Frodo Baggins. George Harrison was going to be Gandalf. Ringo Starr. What do you reckon, Mr. Gandalf?
Very much same as Gandalf.
Exactly. And John Lennon was going to be?
Oh, yes.
John Lennon wanted to be Gollum. Now, Stanley Kubrick at first was very enthusiastic, but then when he realised how big the book was, he said, no, we just can't make all that into a movie. Next slide, please, gentlemen.
They approached Stanley Kubrick of 2001 fame, and Stanley Kubrick was interested, and the Beatles had worked out who was going to play what characters. Now, Paul McCartney was going to be Frodo, Ringo was going to be Sam Gamgee, George Harrison would be Gandalf, and John Lennon would be Gollum. But Stanley Kubrick withdrew from the project because he just felt that The Lord of the Rings was too immense to make into a movie. Rankin Bass did an animated version of The Hobbit, which was very well received by the public. It was faithful to the book, and in 1978, Ralph Bakshi produced a sort of a semi-animated movie of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, what happened was Bakshi's movie only did half of the Lord of the Rings, and so Rankin Bass, who had made The Hobbit, made a version of Return of the King to sort of fill in that gap. And in the Rankin Bass version, there was no Merry and Pippin. We can move on, thank you. Led Zeppelin, a lot of their music was influenced by Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Light took a bow, and then she turned to gold. Prince of Peace embraced the gloom and walked the night alone.
Oh, dance in the dark night, sing of the moonlight.
Dark Lord rides and force the night, and time will tell us all. Darkness of them all. I hear the horses thunder down in the valley below. I'm waiting for the angels of Babylon, waiting for the eastern glow. Of the valley, oh, seas of happiness. The ground is rich from tender care, the pay do not forget. No, no, dance in the dark night.
Yeah, there was a lot of ideas, we'll just pause that one. There was a lot of ideas floating around of, let's do a version of the Lord of the Rings movie. One idea was to have Christopher Lee as Sauron, Roddy McDowall as Elrond. Anyway, we move on to the next slide. This one's quite hilarious. Right, who's seen the movie Excalibur? Okay, John Borman was the producer. Originally, he was approached by United Artists to do a version of The Lord of the Rings. The project, although the whole script was written out and can be found in the Marquette Library in the United States, it was never produced. There were some really peculiarities in there. Number one, Gimli would be belted around the head to get the ancestral password so they can get into Moria. Number two, Frodo, after he got stabbed by the Witch King, would be taken to Rivendell, placed on a table, and all the elves would dance around the table with bits of ferns and that to try to bring in the elven magic healing process. Frodo Frodo later on would have sexual intercourse with Galadriel. Arwen would be just a teenage spiritual guide for the Fellowship, and Aragorn would fall in love with Eowyn. And there was a little bit of sex between them as well. A lot of these ideas Tolkien was absolutely horrified at. The project was dropped. A lot of the ideas of backgrounds and extra effects that were going to be in The Lord of the Rings ended up in Excalibur. Okay, can we move on please, everybody? After the Bakshi movie, we had the first products came out. There were records of the music. Royal Dalton put out porcelain statues. If you get a set of those, they're worth thousands of dollars. And so on. I mean, there was cards, there were games, there were posters. Probably the first movie merchandise for Middle-earth. Next one, please. In the 70s, after Tolkien's death, we had the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales were published, and more interest in Middle-earth, more stories. Donald Swan, with Tolkien, made a music album setting music to some of the poems out of The Lord of the Rings. There's a group an orchestra, who travel around Europe. Unfortunately, they've never come to Australia. I don't know if they've ever gone to United States or any of those places. But it's called the Tolkien Ensemble, and they have a full orchestra. That over the last 10 years, they've made every poem, or set every poem from The Lord of the Rings into music and performed them live on stage. At a lot of their concerts, they have guest singers. Billy Boyd was there recently at one of their concerts as their guest singer. Before Christopher Lee passed away, he used to be the narrator for the stories that went with their productions. Queen Denmark, can we just hold that, pause it there please?
In relation.
Queen Marguerite of Denmark did the illustrations that you saw there before, the eye and that, but she also did the illustrations for the folio publication of The Lord of the Rings. Now, can we go back, move on to Blind Guardian and just pause it please. Pause. Blind Guardian. Now, there's been some metal bands who have done albums themed on Tolkien's works. Blind Guardian did a whole album based on the Silmarillion. And this scene here is Morgoth with Luthien dancing for him. And when Luthien did do that dance, she actually made everybody in his chamber fall asleep. Anyway, we'll play just a little bit of Blind Guardian. Over the years, there's been many board games, many card games, and we already mentioned online games. Just keep that rolling along. Dungeons and Dragons, we'll pause that one there for a moment. Not long after the 1965, I think we're in a bit. Anyway, Dungeons and Dragons was the first tabletop game based originally on Middle-earth. just the one little side thing, and of course Dungeons and Dragons still is very popular to this day. Originally they had hobbits in their games, but due to copyright they had to drop the word hobbit and replace it with halfling. Moving along. Oh, there's been lots of artists. This is Paul Baines, who was famous for illustrating all the Narnia books, and she did some maps for Tolkien. And then there were the Hildebrandt brothers that we saw just a moment ago, and the calendars that have been published since the 1970s every year, and they're full of artwork done by various artists over the years. Next one, please. We'll pause that. Fan movies. There have been some excellent fan movies made based on Tolkien's work. The Hunt for Gollum is about Aragorn searching for Gollum. Now this happens before the Lord of the Rings. Born of Hope even goes back much earlier to when it's about Aragorn's parents. Can we move on, please? Now these are fan-made movies that are made not for profit.
6
Try
years
not to Born
after
of
the
Hope,
return of the
and it's a
king,
very good movie.
Born of Hope takes you on a journey back to Middle-earth.
Now, there's a new one just come out. We can pause it. You just pause that there. A new one has come out called Horn of Gondor, but it's only about 20 minutes long, whereas the previous ones were over an hour long. This one is set in the Second Age of Gondor, once again before the Lord of the Rings. We'll move along. And I think now we'll come to the Jackson movies. I don't have to tell you much about them, because I'm sure everybody here knows of them, if not, if you haven't seen them. With the movies, of course, now we are flooded with merchandise. Once again, adaptations. Moving on. was just a little video of my collection, and anybody who wants to visit me, the kettle's always on. I do have visitors visit occasionally, come and have a look at everything. I also own this hobbit hole that you're seeing now. It's a handmade hobbit hole. Yeah, move on, please. This one's been out in libraries many times and also at Supernova. I'm sure a few of you guys have seen it.
Thorin, you gave a promise.
And of course, the other three movies were the Hobbit movies.
You brought upon them only ruin and death.
You've won the mountain, is that not enough? Now, we defend it.
I came to reclaim something of mine.
This was the last move in a master plan. A plan long in the making.
These bats are bred for one purpose. For war.
Leave Sauron to me.
Bilbo is right. You cannot see what you have become. Everything I did for them.
You started this. You will forgive me if I finish it.
When faced with death, what can anyone do?
I will not hide while others fight our battles for us!
You have but one question to answer. How shall this day end?
My opinion of the movies was that the Lord of the Rings movies, the three of them, were far, far more superior to the Hobbit ones. Not that I didn't like the Hobbit ones, but there was just such a big difference. We've talked about a lot of, well, I've mentioned a lot of things today, video games, online games, music. There has been a Lord of the Rings musical, but apparently it didn't go real well. A lot of symphony orchestras around the world have done Howard Shore's music from the movies. I know in Brisbane here we went to a couple where they have the movie playing without sound behind the orchestra while the orchestra's playing. In recent times, we've had, this is very recent, it's available for purchase now, and it comes from Weta Workshop. It's an unexpected party board game. Around about $53 if I remember rightly. It's just been released. If you want to buy it, go and order it. Next picture, please. Next one, please.
It's coming.
Right, Lord of the Rings, Amazon Prime. They have started producing a TV series. It will be called Lord of the Rings, but it will be set in the second age of Middle-earth, which is the age before Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. Therefore, next slide please. Therefore, there'll be a lot of focus on the land of Numenor, which is an island out in the ocean. And of course, the men of Numenor were the ancestors of Aragorn. But Sauron interferes politically big time. So it's going to be all about once again, he's Lord of the Rings, because in the Second Age is when the rings were made. And he was instrumental in the fall of Numenor. So it's going to be an interesting series. Final slide, please. Oh, one more. 2019, they produced the movie Tolkien. Highly recommended if you like a biopic movie. It's all about his early life, from the time when he was an orphan, right through until when he has children. And when he sits down and writes the first words, the Hold the Ground of the Hobbit. Beautiful movie, well acted. I liked it. A lot of my friends have liked it. The movie critics didn't like it, but that means nothing to me. Now we can go to the final slide. And they are. There's much else that may be told. Thank you very, very much, everybody.